Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome everybody to Morris Talk Live 100. I'm your host, Tarhaka, and tonight's broadcast will be Where Are We as a Family of People in America Today? Now, I thought this was appropriate because of the things that's going on worldwide now, not just in America. This stuff is worldwide. And I'm not only talking about the hurricanes that's been hitting Florida and South America, and now this tropical storm going over the water in Mexico, the new one, one that we experienced is already gone. But we got earthquakes. We got mudslides. We have Russia and Ukraine. We got China and Taiwan. We have all kind of stuff going on. And I think tonight would be appropriate for me to address some of this stuff. We're going to deal with the following questions. Keep in mind, I have some documents. I have a document that I want to tell you about. You know, we've already dealt with creating our own contracts and creating our own college curriculum. So therefore, I have some books, a list of books that I want to recommend for you. So I would recommend that you get yourself a paper and pencil so you can write some of this stuff down. The first question is, what can you do to save yourself? The next question is, how do your contracts benefit you? In other words, when you create a contract, it's designed to benefit you. But how does that benefit you? What can you profit? When can you profit? Where can you profit? Why can you profit? Who said you profit? When can you profit? Now you should answer these questions in your own mind through either benefits to be gained or losses to be avoided. The next question is, what is your personal level of consciousness? The next question is, are the Moors in America free today? The next question is, how much does America owe the Moors? Why is there so much anger in the world today? And then we're going to go over some of this stuff too. Are the Moors in America Africans? What is an allodial title? These are just a few of the questions that we're going to deal with here tonight, this evening. And before I give you the book list, the list of books that I have for you to add to your own college curriculum. Now remember in our previous broadcast, we talked about you owning your own personal college curriculum, creating your own personal college curriculum, not only for you, but to leave as a legacy for your own children. You pick out the materials, and not only should you just have your own personal library with books, I recommend that you get a video library, and that way you are able to put out much more information and much more detail, and your curriculum could be expanded. And so I have I'm not telling you to do something that I ain't already done. And I'm ready. I've done it. So it certainly would be nice if all of my family members from one end of America to the other would do the same thing. After all, you claim you love yourself, claim you love the children. But anyway, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and run these commercials, then we're ready to get on down in the broadcast. So y'all hold on a minute. That'll give you plenty of time. We'll give you plenty of time to get your paper and pencil so you can write this stuff down, okay?
The greatest move you can make beginning in 2022 is to move out of the public and into the private. That's how you get rid of student loans, child support, mortgages, foreclosures, and all this kind of business. Go to TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out my Contact Us form by leaving your email address, and I'll rush my free report straight to your email box. Our economy is in shambles today for people who insist on living in the public. Move into the private. Make an easy transaction. Go to www.TarhakaDebtElimination.org. That's TarhakaDebtElimination.org. Fill out the Contact Us form, and I'll rush you my free report. as a secured party and creditor. Can you buy a home, a car, and other items you need and want? The answer is yes, and there are documents you use to do just that. Catch my radio podcast at Blog Talk Radio. Go to tarhakadebtelimination.org. Fill out the box with your email address that say join our mailing list, and I will send you my free report. You got credit problems? Contact me at tarhakadebtelimination.org. Let's stay in honor and get into the private. Hello, everybody. This is Tarhaka again. This is a reminder of the remedies available to you in this country. A private man or woman can live a debt-free life if you choose, and that includes private banking. The use of your proper status in commerce is a fantastic tool to use. Request my free report at tarhakadebtelimination.org. Instead of setting up a will that'll probably end up in probate, why don't you set up your private trust? Exercise your secured party and creditor status. Contact me at my website and set yourself free. That's tarhakadebtelimination.org. tarhakadebtelimination.org. Get out of debt. Now is the time for you to set yourself free. Peace.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Now, let's get on down in here. The first thing I want to do is, and I'm only going to do this twice tonight because it's such an extensive list. I'm going to give you your books that you need to write down the title of these books and their authors so that you can add these to your library. And keep in mind, a lot of these books I've already told you over the years, and they are part of my library. But for those of you who are new here and you have not gotten these books, write down the title of the books and their authors. And keep in mind, this entire broadcast is going to be converted and into a video and uploaded right there on YouTube. So if you miss something, you can go right on back over there to YouTube and catch it. You can rewind it until you get it all wrote down, and that way you know what to get and add to your library, which will expand your own college. That way, this homeschooling stuff that you all are doing, that you should be doing, you'll be able to have more control over the knowledge that your children have, and you can give it to them straight. instead of turning them over to schools and colleges and universities across the country, and they are filling their heads with a pack of tales and lies. Okay? Now, the first book I want to recommend that you get is a book entitled The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Howard Griffin. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Howard Griffin. The next book is How to Stick It to the Internal Revenue Service by Sherry Peel Jackson. How to Stick It to the IRS, Sherry Peel Jackson. The Federal Mafia by Irwin Schiff. The Federal Mafia by Irwin Schiff. Black Labor, White Wealth by Claude Anderson. Black Labor, White Wealth by Claude Anderson. Dirty Little Secrets by Claude Anderson. Dirty Little Secrets by Claude Anderson. The Depth of Money by James Richards. The Depth of Money by James Richards. The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Green Lee. The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Green Lee. Behold, a Pale Horse by William Cooper. Behold, a Pale Horse by William Cooper. The ISIS Paper by Francis Cress Welsing. The ISIS Paper by Francis Cress Welsing. Now, these are just the books for this week. And, of course, when we do another broadcast, I'll come out with another list for us to for you to add over. And this is just for the people who do not have these books. And these particular books are part of my own library, part of my own system here where I am. So I just want to make sure that you all have the same thing. Now, before we get on down in here, I'm going to deal with this question number 7. What is an allodial title? Let's deal with that straight off the top before we go any further. And I have something that I'm going to read off to you. What is an allodial title? 11 things in 2022 you must know. While not used in the United States anymore, allodial title has some deep roots in the real estate industry. It is also a concept that has caused some confusion in recent years. So let's take a closer look at what you may need to know about this concept as a landowner. What is allodial title? Allodial title is a concept in some systems of property law. It occurs when real property, i.e. land, buildings, and fixtures, is owned free and clear of any superior landlord. Okay? Historically, it was distinguished as property held absolutely and not subject to a feudal relationship. True allodial title is rare in the common law world, such as the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, or the Republic of Ireland, and is often reserved for government. In these countries, it is far more common to hold title in fee simple. Okay, you got that? More common to hold title, far more common to hold title in fee, that's F-E-E, simple, S-I-M-P-L-E. What is the history of holding European land in allodium? Allodium is land freely held. That is, land that is without obligation of service to any overlord. During the Middle Ages, most land was held by feudal tenure, and thus allodial land tenure was not significant during this period. However, at the end of the 9th century, allodial land increases in France due to the anarchy that accompanied the decline of the Carolinian monarchy. This did not last long, however, as much of the new property was brought into a feudal relationship. In a feudal relationship, the holder of the land owns certain services to his lord. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the only appreciable amount of allodial land remaining was limited to peasant holding in the southwest. In Germany, there were large allodial estates held by nobles, especially in Saxony. In England, there was also a large amount of allodial land before the Norman conquest. Following this occurrence in 1066, allodial land disappeared under new rulers. While allodial land was freely held, it was always free of restrictions entirely. If the holder of the allodial title chose to have feudal tenants, then they would owe certain obligations and could not be considered in astute control of their holdings. These obligations were owned primarily in terms of protection. Eventually, French feudalism declined, and following the French Revolution in 1789, all land was tenure allodial title. In England, no land is referred to as allodial. That in the state, its fee simple aligns with the practice of absolute ownership. What is a fee simple estate? Most property ownership is common law jurisdiction is fee simple. Y'all got that? Most property ownership in common law jurisdictions is fee simple. Fee simple refers to how people own real estate. In most cases, if you buy a home from a seller in the United States, you will have what is known as fee simple ownership of this property. Fee simple falls under the umbrella of freehold real estate. Well, explain more about their freehold and household estates in the next section. All right, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm not going to go any further, but that's just a little bit. Now, you can go to Google and different places on the internet, and you can type in the question, what is an allodial title? And you can go down the list so you can get more information on about exactly what it is, okay? But let's deal with the question of how can you, what do you do to save yourself? Now, to answer that question, you know, I specialize in contract law. And what I'm going to do this evening is I have a document here that I created in 2016 and made it public record. And it's currently public record now, but you'll have to go over to my blog spot. You go to tarhaka.elimination.org and look over there to the left. You see the Tarhaka blog post. Now, once you get over there, you're going to have to dig through. Just scroll on down, just keep going down, until you run into this particular document. Now, this document here was redone. I didn't have to add anything to it. It was already done, but I was going to republish it and remake it a bigger public record. And it was recreated the 19th of November in 2021. This document is called a not negotiable common law copyright notice. Okay, and let's take a look at what this document has to say. Not negotiable common law copyright notice. Now, this is my own personal document here. All rights are hereby reserved with regard to common law copyright of trade names and trademarks, as well as any and all derivatives and variations in the spelling of, say, trade names or trademarks, belonging to Tarhaka of the family base. Now, you see the C in a circle, and Tarhaka is being spelled in upper and lowercase letters because we're referring to a man. We're not referring to a fictitious character here. Tarhaka of the family base, which shall include, without limitations, all usernames, handles used in his own outline activities. Said names may neither be used nor reproduced, neither in whole nor in part, nor in any manner whatsoever without the prior express written consent and acknowledgement of Tarhaka of the family faith, hereafter known as secured party, or by his implied consent in the event that he has published, distributed, or broadcast any of his intellectual property for educational or entertainment purposes in any medium, which will be automatically revoked in the event of false and malicious statements and being made, bad faith being demonstrated by any individual or juristic person, as well as the agent of said individual or juristic person, hereafter known as the user, who may not use any work associated with the secured party name for financial gain or benefit of any kind, under any circumstances, for any purposes whatsoever, with the intent of being contractually bound. The user consents and agrees that upon the service of and or public notice of these terms of use, they shall not display, recreate, reproduce, nor otherwise use in any manner, whether knowingly or unknowingly, any of the common law trade names, trademarks, and all versions or derivatives thereof belonging to secured party, nor the artwork of any of his names, nor any derivatives thereof, nor any variations in the spelling of any of his names and all versions and derivatives thereof, without his prior express written consent and acknowledgement, unless otherwise expressly agreed between the user and the secured party, or stipulated by the terms and conditions of this notice. Now, I'm going to stop right there, and we're going to come back and we'll deal with part 3. So right now, I'm going to get on back over here, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go on down into the rest of this broadcast. But now, this is, I've already previously told you that we are dealing with the conglomerate of corporations inside the United States of America, masquerading as government. And everything in this country operates on a continuous series of contracts under what's called contract law. The problem has been that we have been receiving and reacting to everybody else's contracts instead of creating our own contracts. And this is just one of the many contracts that I have created for myself. And I want to share that with you on tonight's broadcast. And this is very, very unique. Once you create a contract and your contract becomes public notice, it is signed, it's dated, you can have witnesses, it can be notarized, under the form of an affidavit, then that's a very, very powerful tool. You want to make sure that your document is signed correctly, so your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, and it goes in the proper place, to the proper people that you want to send this kind of stuff to. Make it a public record for your own personal use. And we're going to get on down in that, and you'll understand why and what was one of the main reasons for me creating this document when we get down to number 5. And I'm going to show you, you'll be able to tell just from listening to this why I did that. Okay? Now, let's take a look at what's going on this planet, and then we're gonna deal with that for a minute. We're gonna take a little quick short break, and I'll be right back. And I hope you're still writing this stuff down.
Emissions of greenhouse gases need to peak within the next 3 years if we're to stave off the worst effects of climate change. And even then, we'd still need new technology to suck carbon dioxide out of the skies by the middle of the century. In their latest report, UN scientists are warning we are on course for devastating changes to our climate. And the head of the UN called out government and business leaders for saying one thing on reducing emissions and doing another. Put simply, he said, they are lying and the results will be catastrophic. Here's our climate editor, Justin Rolat.
11, What the UN has published today is a roadmap for saving the world from the worst of climate change. But it comes with a massive warning. It is now or never. There can be no more broken promises on climate, says the UN.
Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic.
But there is some good news in today's report, so let's start there. The cost of renewable technologies, wind turbines, solar panels, batteries, have been falling far quicker than anyone expected. As a result, the world is rapidly building solar and wind plants. In fact, last year, 10% of global electricity was generated from renewables, according to a report last week. But, says the UN, harnessing the power of the sun and the wind will not be enough. The report details how we'll also need to change the way we get around, what we eat, how efficient our homes and businesses are, how we farm, how we produce the goods we buy, how we move those goods around, and how we protect the natural world. In short, pretty much everything has to change because pretty much everything we do produces carbon dioxide. It is possible, says today's report, but time is almost out. We've got to peak carbon emissions before 2025, says the UN, and then cut them back by at least 43% by the end of 2030. And then we need to take them all the way down to net zero by 2050. It is a tall order, especially given that emissions are currently going up, not down.
What needs to happen is that we need to use all the available tools we have in terms of policies, technologies, and we need to start to use them immediately. If that happens, then it is still possible, just possible, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees.
But we'll also need to develop technologies to take carbon out of the atmosphere to balance out those emissions we can't eradicate. Trees are one way, but we'll need high-tech solutions too, and they have yet to be proved at scale. Now, making all these changes will cost money, but it will also deliver huge benefits, says the UN.
Your life will probably get better. That is one of the key results, because there are many co-benefits with these measures that are needed. Better air quality, better health, more active lifestyles, healthier food systems.
The authors of today's report are very clear. They say the fossil fuel era has to end, and end very soon. That conclusion, indeed all the conclusions in this report, have been approved by all the governments of the world. So the big question now is, will they enable the radical action today's report demands?
Well, our climate editor Justin Rowell is here with me. And Justin, the UN has produced many reports on climate change, but surely this is the strongest yet.
I think it is. I think what we're seeing here, in a sense, is the UN grabbing the world by the shoulders and shaking it, saying, don't you get it? You know, time is really running out. You have to act now. I mean, they're saying, of course, look, you know, it is possible. We've got the technology. We can do this. But it is a really tough call. You know, I mean, you saw the huge gap there between the trajectory, the direction emissions are going and where we need to go. I mean, really, really challenging. But look, on the plus side, this is a document signed by governments. The governments of the world, at a time when cooperation is in really short supply, have all signed up to this. They're saying, we get it, we recognise this science, we will take this action. So as I said in the report, the big question now is, will they do it? Will they take action?
Justin, we'll see. Thanks very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. Now, before I go down to number 3 on this non-negotiable common law copyright notice, I want to talk a little bit about why is there so much anger in the world today. Well, astrologically, and I want to look at this time from a scientific perspective, because this kind of business is going on all over the planet. I mean, I think, in Iran, it seems to me that they got the whole government pent up in the building. Well, that's the way it looks to me. And things are changing. I mean, even right there in your own neighborhood, you got folks that you're dealing with You say one thing, they think you said something different, and now they're angry, they're hostile, they're jumping out of cars over the road rage business and shooting people. We got a lot of that going on down here. We had a young man, he's on trial right now for killing 2 children. We have another young lady, she's going on trial and to be sentenced for murdering her own child. I mean, you know, you see these different things going on, and then you have to ask yourself a question: what is going on the earth? Well, we're in a period of time now, and we're moving toward, in the next 10 days, we'll be moving toward a solar eclipse. Now, this is going to be a very unique period of time during this stage of the game. And I think that this time we should be vigilant, and I think we should pay attention to what's going on around us and how people are responding to us and how they're responding to their own siblings, parents, and their own environment. And of course, you know, we just dealt with the school shooting. And I think we had a tremendous earthquake struck over there in, I think it was a certain region of China. I didn't mark all of this stuff down. I'm just trying to give you a little bit off the top of my head and to get you to understand we're in a certain cycle astrologically, and then later on we're going to go through another cycle. Now, I'm not trying to give you any dire circumstances to say, oh man, this is the end of the world. No, it's not going. But it is going to shake us up to the point that we will wake up and open your eyes and realize that this is real and there's something that's going on. And so I think that it's going to take all of our participation in the changing of your mind, being vigilant, watching what you're doing and what you're getting involved in, and where you know, all these things are going to play a very, very important part. But we will have a major eclipse in 10 days. Now, I think, I don't know how many days it is now, 17, 18 or something like that, I don't know. We'll have the elections going on. So we got all that kind of business going on. We got the Democrats against the Republicans. I mean, the mudslinging and all this going on, all this kind of business going on. And, of course, you know, Florida almost got sunk by a massive hurricane that came on land on folk and just wiped out. You know, we had millions of people without any electricity, and we got whole houses missing, cars completely and totally underwater, houses 2 and 3 feet worth of water in not just in the living room and dining room, all the way in the bathroom, and looked like it was trying to go upstairs. Roofs off of houses missing, whole houses removed off their foundations. We got piers going out into the ocean that are no more. They are totally gone. So what I'm saying to you is this is just not a simple isolated thing. There's something going on our planet, and I think it's something that we need to be aware of. And we should not depend on somebody else to give us all the information. I think we should do an investigation on our own. So it's very important, just like I said on a previous broadcast about you creating your own college curriculum. And by doing that, you're able to go back and learn a whole lot about your environment, where we are. And whatever you do, do not leave the scientific aspect and the astrological aspect out of your curriculum. Now let's go on down into point number 3 here in this non-negotiable common law copyright notice. Number 3, for the avoidance of doubt, secure party neither grants nor implies nor otherwise give consent for any unauthorized use of his name in parentheses, all variations and derivatives thereof, all intellectual property, and any such unauthorized use is strictly prohibited, and the unauthorized user will become liable for substantial charges. Number 4, secured party is not now, nor has ever been, an accommodation party, nor a surety for any of his names, nor for any derivatives thereof, nor for any variations in the spelling of said names, nor for any other juristic person, legal entity, or individual, and is hereunder indemnified against any and all claims, legal actions, orders, warrants, judgments, demands, liabilities, losses, depositions, summonses, lawsuits, costs, fines, liens, levies, penalties, damage, interest, and expenses whatsoever, both absolute and contingent, as are due, as might become due, nor existing, and as might hereafter arise, and as might be suffered by, imposed upon, and incurred by any of his names for any and every reason, purpose, and are causes whatsoever issued without secured parties' express authorization or consent, or material evidence demonstrating his direct involvement in any action for which his names are alleged to be liable. Okay, now before we go down into number 5, because number 5 is very, very special, and this is one point, because remember, as you being the creator of your own contract, it benefits you. And when you do your own contract and your own affidavit, you get to put in there whatever you want to, provided it's lawful. Okay? So before we go to number 5, we're going to take a little quick break, and we'll be right back. So y'all make sure you pay close attention to this next plug here.
The relentless barrage of images of black Americans being killed for some has simply been too much to bear. But what do you do? Where do you go when you believe that the place that you live is systemically racist? Some hope for change, some march for justice. Others, as Steve Osensami reports, are simply packing their bags.
For now, it's just a campground on red Georgia clay under the hot Georgia sun.
We're able to address things like violence by living in tolerance and love and being an example with one another.
But for the black Americans who are moving here, this is a dream.
And we just want to welcome you to Freedom, Georgia. Welcome to freedom! We improvise in freedom.
They're starting small, 19 families so far who've pooled their money to buy these 97 acres of land about 2 hours south of Atlanta. They're Freedom, Georgia. It's their escape from what they say is the everyday racism that feels a part of life in America.
Man, please don't shoot me, man. Please, man. I just lost my mom, man.
The final push, they tell us, came this summer. After seeing these images of black Americans being gunned down by white police officers and white neighbors.
We came together and we said, you know what? We don't like being slaughtered in the streets. We don't like our children being at the mercy of some psychopath that wants to tackle us and arrest us and bang our heads. We don't want that. So how about we just come together and build our own?
Renee Walters and Ashley Scott are the two women who started this all after seeing an ad for affordable land.
Well, it was a post that went viral about buy a town for sale for the price of a New York apartment. And so when I looked at it, I saw it had all these parcels and acres.
This is by no means the first time where people who felt persecuted or unwanted have left a place to raise stakes somewhere new. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Germany all moved to America to find better lives and created ethnic communities. It's why the conservative Dutch left the motherland in the mid-1800s and set up in Holland, Michigan. The tulip festivals and their windmills are important to the people here to this day.
So we was on the road all day yesterday.
But these are Americans who are already in the land of the free. The Browns are one of the thousands of black families thinking about building here. They drove down from Chicago on Labor Day weekend to investigate.
I think that if we want to feel safe, secure, and be able to honor our culture, our heritage, and plan for our children and not have to worry about what happens to them when they leave out the door, we have to, as you said, not necessarily segregate, but have our own. There are so many communities that have their own space, and it's not that we're anti-anything. It's we have to be pro-Black love, you know.
Kendra Field is a historian who underlines that Black Americans have tried this before. She says that racial violence is usually the reason why. Nicodemus, Kansas, Eatonville, Florida, Mound Bayou, Mississippi. All the results, she says, of the black bodies that hung from the trees of their time.
There's a really rich and long history of African-American immigration, both domestically and also abroad, for instance, Back to Africa movement, and almost always in response to, in relationship to the history of racial violence and economic exploitation in the U.S.
What do you say to people who say, you know, that's kind of racist to want to, you know, segregate yourself in that way, and that if white Americans did this, we would be saying that this is racist?
I would just echo that, you know, how we think of these things, freedom, racism, integration, depends on one's circumstances and the moment that we're in, right? At one moment, what freedom might look like is an integrated classroom. At another moment, especially under the threat of very real violence, and I'll use the words of that same founder of Freedom Georgia, she said we're looking for a safe space. And I don't think you can really argue with that. She's not arguing for segregation of the nation overall. She's arguing for a safe space for a certain number of families that perceive themselves to need it, and I completely understand that.
The professor knows this personally. She has people in her own family who started this black settlement in Oklahoma.
And then when that fell through and Oklahoma ended up looking a lot like Mississippi in terms of its Jim Crow laws, they were participating in a Back to Africa movement, and they ended up helping to purchase a ship for $69,000 in 1913 and 14, and actually migrating to the Gold Coast, which is now present-day Ghana.
Welcome to present-day Ghana, where according to the International Monetary Fund, they've now produced one of the fastest-growing economies, and where the success and safety here rank alongside several countries in Europe. In the last few years, black Americans searching for a real-life Wakanda started moving here in droves.
Hello everybody, Rashad McCrory. I'm from Harlem, New York City.
40-year-old Rashad McCrory runs a travel company and moved here during the pandemic. He says he's here living his best life and is not looking back.
It's all part of the systematic injustice that put us in a condition where a lot of times we have to come out of America to heal, to be places where we're not always the victims, we're not always in protection mode. And being in Africa right now and relocating out of the United States, whether it's temporary or long term, I feel myself healing. I'm starting to see black people in love and unity.
That's some strong stuff, right? That you had to leave America to heal.
It's like now I'm on the outside looking in. You know, like what they say about a bad relationship. You're in a bad relationship, but you don't know it because it's all you know.
For the first time in his life, he says he's not afraid of the police.
Only in Ghana I have police friends. You know, in America, I refuse to have police friends no matter what the ethnicity is. And it comes from the system. I'm starting to see that people can have altercations and it doesn't have to turn into violence. That law enforcement isn't a villain. You know, it's so many things that I'm starting to see in a different light that's actually making me more of a whole person, showing me what reality is and actually showing how at sometimes diabolical systematic injustice is in America, because it has us thinking all out of whack. Music, you know, when I'm listening to Ghanaian music, I don't hear anything about fighting. I don't hear anything about shooting. I may hear ganja, you know, marijuana in some of the songs and alcohol. But when I listen to my American music, it's shoot, drugs, murder, you know, on everything. Here, we're not hearing that on everything. There's a lot of things going on in America that that as Black Americans we need to get away from sometimes. You know, and hear what see what real healthy living is about.
At the home site for black families in Wilkinson County, Georgia, Dr. Tabitha Ball and her husband Greg Mullins say they first need to build roads, get running water and electricity here before families can build their homes. And even though they currently live in a community with black doctors and black police, they say that moving here is still better for their family.
We're not preaching separation. We're not preaching segregation. No. We just want to be safe. That's it.
Exactly. That's all. We're not asking anything else. I just want to be able to live.
Safe. Is that too much to ask for? Just to be safe and happy and
that's what
and
this
healthy.
is stemming from. Safety.
That's what this is about.
They feel that black Americans in today's world are suffering trauma and that the solution for them is to get away.
This land to be an example and an inspiration to other families, that you too can buy land together and create the village that you want for yourselves. And this is our village. We are a village of families, and we happen to be black families, but what we want is for all families to have and experience that same power of doing something together and building something for ourselves.
For ABC News Live, I'm Steve Osunsami.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live...
Okay, everybody, we're back. Now, I'm going to go on down here. And number 5, we have a train comes across the tracks. So hold on 1 second. And so I can read off this. Now, number 5 is very, very important. Keep in mind, like I told you at the outset, this is my contract. I create to benefit me, my family. But I'm sharing this with you. The title of this contract is not dash negotiable. Common law copyright notice. Okay? And it says number 5. Common law copyright is also claimed by a secure party over any and all means of identification of his person, defined as all fingerprints, footprints, palm prints, thumbprint, handprints, toe print, RNA materials, DNA materials, blood, and blood fractions, biopsies, surgically removed tissue, body parts, organs, hair, teeth, nails, semen, urine, feces, excrement, and other body fluids and matter of any kind, and breath samples, voice print, retinal image, and the description thereof, and all the other corporeal identification factors, and said factors, physical counterparts, any and all body tissues of any kind, in any form, and all records and record numbers, including the results recorded or otherwise of all and any tests performed on any materials relating to his name and information pertaining thereunto, as well as any visual images, photographic or electronic, notwithstanding any and all claims to the contrary. And that's number 5, and we'll go down to number 6. Secured party retains absolute control and mastery over the peaceful possession of his body, mind, and mental faculties to the extent that no medication, foods, or otherwise may be administered to him in the absence of his freely given full formal consent without breaching the terms of this notice. Self-executing security agreement in the event of unauthorized use. Okay, that includes number 6. Now, before we go to number 7, we're going to take another little quick break here, and let's see, and then we can relax. And I will go over the book list again. Okay, I'll go over that again. As for right now, we're just going to take a little another little quick break. So y'all hold on a minute. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. Things are changing rapidly in our world today. This is the greatest time and point in history to get yourself free from debt and change your status in commerce by moving out of the public and into the private. Being a secured party and creditor is some of what you need to know. Join our mailing list by leaving your email address in the Join Our Mailing List box at tarhakadataelimination.org. Mortgage, student loan, credit card, IRS, private banking is also some of what you need to know how to achieve. Tarhakadataelimination.org. Don't forget, the greatest focal point in your life is when preparedness and opportunity meet. Tarhakadataelimination.org. Now is the time. Right now. Get out of debt.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Now, on the same document, the copy claim, non-negotiable copy claim affidavit, and that's what it is. Let's deal with Part 7. Under the terms of this notice, the user consents and agrees that any use of any of the secured party's name and all variations and derivatives thereof are all intellectual property other than authorized uses constitutes unauthorized uses, which automatically contractually binds the user and renders his notice a security agreement, wherein the user becomes the debtor of secured party and unreservedly agrees that, number one, the user grants secured parties and security interests in all its assets, land and personal property, and all of the user's interests in the assets, land and personal property, in the sum of $1 million per occurrence of the unauthorized use of any of the names belonging to the secured party, the unauthorized use fee, as well as for each and every occurrence of the use of any and all variations derivatives thereof, as well as any variations in the spelling of those names, plus cost, and the right to claim triple damages in the event of the user's failure to cure its default. Number 2, the user authenticates the security agreement wherein the user is debtor, and Tarhaka of the family base is secured party, and wherein the user pledges all of his property, commercial tort claims, letters of credit, rights, chattel paper, negotiable and non-negotiable instruments, deposit accounts documents, and general intangible, as well as all its interest in all such foregoing property now owned and herein acquired, now existing hereafter arises in whatever located as collateral for securing the user's contractual obligation in favor of the secured party for its unauthorized use of secured party's name and our intellectual property. Number 3, the user consents and agrees with secured party's filing of a financing statement in the UCC filing office and or with any counter recorder or register wherein the user is named as debtor and the name user without authorization is named as a secured party or any other names that the secured party deems appropriate. Number 4, the user consents and agrees that said financing statement described above in paragraph 3 is considered continuing and further consents and agrees with the secured party's filing of any continuation statement necessary for maintaining secured party's security interest in all of the user's property and interest in property, pledging as collateral in this security agreement and described above in paragraph 2 until the user's contractual obligations therefore incurred has been fully satisfied or a waiver has been expressly granted in signed writing by secured party. Number 5, the user consents and agrees with the secured party's filing of any financial statement as described above in paragraphs 3 and 4, as well as filing of any, hold on one second, y'all, of any agreement as described above in paragraph 2. In any legal proceeding deemed necessary by a secured party in the enforcement of the terms of this notice. Okay, we're going to stop right there and we'll come back with the remainder of this until we get down to the end. But anyway, we're going to go to the next segment of our broadcast. So y'all just hold on a minute and make sure that you're taking all this in, and don't forget I'll be bringing in the books and the title and the authors of these books again after this segment. Hold on.
African Americans in Galveston, Texas were really among the last to know freedom had come.
The poet in me thinks about the scene of General Gordon Granger reading to them his General Order 3, that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free.
I think that it's really important that we focus on that day on African American, not just achievement, but also resistance. And you see that right now in the uprisings around the country. And I think it's taken on a particular poignance this year.
The Emancipation Proclamation had gone into effect January 1st, 1863. This Union General was making his announcement on June 19th, 1865.
And so in a way, Juneteenth also admits to a delayed freedom, that it took too long for us to be free.
Hey everyone, I'm Tremaine Lee. We are in the midst of a great reckoning on race in America, but in many ways, it's a reckoning on America itself, of what this country has been in the past, what it is today, and what it could one day be. As we grapple with these big fundamental questions, we're left to interrogate virtues we assume to be true, that at its core, America is a land of freedom, but freedom has never been free. especially for the descendants of enslaved Africans who toiled in bondage for centuries. It took struggle and bloodshed over many years. On this Juneteenth, Black Independence Day, a commemoration of freedom for those once held in slavery, we ask the question, are we truly free yet? This is Can You Hear Us Now, Juneteenth, a discussion about justice, equality, and the meaning of freedom. It's been 155 years since all Black Americans finally learned of their emancipation from slavery. Yet some say the struggle for true freedom continues. After the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks, millions flooded the streets all over the world, demanding justice, equity, and freedom. I spoke with a few of the foot soldiers in that fight to find out what they believe true freedom really means. From Minneapolis to Paris, from London to Atlanta, from New York City to Washington, D.C. This is what democracy looks like. The call for equality, justice, and freedom. Freedom. It's what 93-year-old Opal Lee has been fighting for most of her life.
A group of people in the neighborhood where my parents had just bought a house didn't want us there, and they burned the place down. It happened on the 19th of June.
That date, June 19th, or as some call it, Juneteenth, Black Independence Day. It's the day in 1865 when a Union Army general arrived in Galveston, Texas, with the news that the Civil War was over and enslaved people were free. It was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Lee is campaigning to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Each year, she walks 2.5 miles, symbolizing the time it took for all Black people to get their freedom. Do you ever get tired of just having to push and having to fight?
No! Gee whiz! No! I'm not one of those people who are sitting in a rocking chair thinking the Lord's going to come get me. He's going to have to catch me. If we can just understand that we all bleed red blood and that we simply need to get past this thing of color.
But for over 400 years, color has been used to divide Americans.
Anti-blackness is the organizing principle of white supremacy in the United States. We are the gold standard of those who've been oppressed based on the racial caste system that racial slavery, genocide, settler colonialism set up in this country.
Dr. Peniel Joseph is a leading expert on race and history. Do we have fully realized freedom in America?
No, we don't. We've had racial progress. If you're viewed as a citizen by law enforcement, if you're viewed as a citizen by your fellow neighbors, they don't marginalize you, they don't dehumanize you, they don't incarcerate you, they don't kill you, so that's why we say Black Lives Matter.
And for America's younger generation, justice and true freedom still seems elusive.
As a Black person, freedom doesn't mean anything until Black liberation is achieved.
Kerrigan Williams and Jacqueline LeBain co-founded Freedom Fighters DC in the midst of the George Floyd protest. They plan to make this Juneteenth a call to action. How important do you think it is for Black folks and white folks to come together in this moment?
It can't just be Black people fighting for Black people. It needs to be all people fighting for Black people.
And Opal Lee is glad to see a new generation rising.
I'm delighted with what the young people are doing. I'm not wishing I was younger, but hey, I'd like to be out there in the middle of it.
With me now is Dr. Peniel Joseph, founding director of the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. Tiffany Crutcher is the twin sister of Terrence Crutcher, who was shot and killed by a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 2016, and is now the founder of the Terrence Crutcher Foundation. Anna DeVere Smith is an actor and playwright. And author, retired Army captain, and CEO of Robin Hood, Wes Moore. Thank you all for joining me. Dr. Joseph, I want to go back to this notion of freedom. Black folks have certainly fought for it. But what is true freedom in this American context? Have we achieved it? And if not, why not?
Well, we have yet to achieve true freedom. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. struggled his whole life for radical Black citizenship, and Malcolm X talked of radical Black dignity. And King defined citizenship as not just the absence of racial oppression and racial segregation. He defined citizenship as the appearance of health care, decent housing, and really a guaranteed income. And that's what the Poor People's Campaign is about. So to achieve citizenship, we have to not only get rid of thousands of racist policies and transform systemic racism in this country, we have to actually have the appearance of anti-racist and racial justice policies. And for black people, that means very simple things. It means the ability to accumulate wealth, to have income, to have housing, to have health care, and really to have safety and security, and not in the way we think about the criminal justice system, which has incarcerated and punished and demonized black people, but safety and security to have investment in communities, to have mental and physical wellness for our children, to have access for our LGBTQ community, to say that black women's lives matter, that black trans women's lives matter. So it really means both the end of racial oppression, but the appearance of institutions that are both anti-racist and are promoting racial justice in every facet of their being.
Wes, Dr. Joseph talked about Malcolm X there, and I want to talk to you about the idea of racial progress. Malcolm X once said that stabbing someone in the back and pulling the knife out 2 inches isn't actually progress. Progress is removing the knife and then beginning the healing process. Where are we in terms of that process? And metaphorically speaking, is the knife still in the back of black America?
The knife is absolutely still in the back of black America. I mean, think about it, where according to the Federal Reserve right now, a black family has a net worth of just shy of $18,000 compared to a net worth of $171,000 for a white family. So in other words, one white family has a net worth of 10 black families. And that's not because these families worked harder. That's because of histories and structures and systemic racism that has been placed into all the frames within our large society. Race is one of the most predictable, one of the greatest predictors of outcomes across several areas within our society, and that is life expectancy, academic achievement, income, wealth, maternal mortality. And so if we're not willing to acknowledge the history of why these disparities exist, then there's no way we can actually begin to attack them with any real degree of sincerity. And so, yes, progress, when we talk about progress can also only be made if we're willing to acknowledge the history of why the progress has been so backwards and reverse in the way that these systems have been built.
And Wes talks about those economic disparities, and in so many ways, that's also been violent, right? The violent economic dislocation of folks. But when it comes to actual violence, Anna, this week marks 5 years since the Emmanuel Church massacre, and we're on the heels of a string of deadly police shootings. What role has police, vigilante, and white supremacist violence played in limiting black freedom?
Huge. Not just in terms of lives lost, but also it's a spiritual assault. I have friends who are accomplished black individuals who are afraid to go out for a run. And of course, the massacre in Charleston, we'll never forget it. So I think all of these things, the grief that's caused, the anxiety that's caused, in addition to the blood that is shed.
Sadly, many of us watched the video of your brother being killed by a police officer. And you are among countless black people who've had a family member killed by police violence. And I want to ask you, when the state kills, what do we lose collectively? Obviously, you lost your brother, but all of us, have we all lost something when that happens?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Tremaine. All I can say is that we're in a state of emergency as it relates to being black in America. The past few weeks, they've been tumultuous, they've been triggering, and of course, they've brought back memories of what happened to my twin here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And today, everyone from all over the country is touching down on Tulsa, Oklahoma to commemorate Juneteenth, and not only Juneteenth, but to continue the protests of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and of course, my twin brother right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But you can't really talk about what's happening today in Tulsa, Oklahoma without reflecting back on what happened almost 100 years ago during the Tulsa Race Massacre. The same police culture, that same state violence that burned down Black Wall Street is the same state violence that killed my twin brother and that's killing black and brown people in America today. And so we all should be concerned.
When we think about the systems that bind us, and you think about whether it's access to health care, whether it's criminal justice and police violence, black folks are trying to move through these systems. And one of those systems that we've been grappling with for a very long time is the political system, the electoral system. And we're in an election year, one with really high stakes. And there's already concern about voter suppression efforts. And I want to ask each of you, can we vote our way to freedom? Wes, let's start with you.
The answer, can we vote ourselves to freedom, is we have to, because we have to understand how much voting matters and how much laws matter. I think about the amount of progress, that the progress we have been able to make is because that we've been able to push a value system that eventually our laws were able to keep up with. Where as Dr. King once said, that laws won't change the heart, but they will protect me from the heart. And so who we put in these offices and what we permit to be done on our behalf as taxpayers, it does matter. And so as we're thinking about this election, to know that there's not a single bit of philanthropy or corporate social responsibility that is going to be enough to be able to not only undo the level of inequity that's happened, but also to actively push us towards an anti-racist agenda that can actually give our communities and our people real opportunities of growth. That is something that has to be done in concert with elected officials who are sitting in these seats and supposed to be advocating on our behalf.
Anna, what's your take on that? Obviously, folks have made it harder to vote. There are many hurdles. You think about voter ID laws. You think about the long lines. Black folks facing this election. Is this a hurdle that black folks can get over, and is this a way towards freedom?
Well, let's go back to the notion of not knowing that you were free, that the information that you were free was denied you, right? So as again, we think about Juneteenth. So I would say that we know about this throughout history, and that activists, all of us, should assemble what's happened before to think about how we can disrupt it, actively disrupt it.
Dr. Joseph, what do you think? Historically speaking, it's been tough. And their voter suppression efforts have been keeping folks back. Is this a way?
I think we have to vote, and everybody should register to vote and, vote like our lives depend on it in November, because they do. But I also think it's about more than the vote. The transformation that we're seeing now is about black people alongside of Latinx, Native American, Asian, Indigenous, and white allies really taking to the streets. We have to remember democracy is in the streets. What Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the greatness of America lied in the right to protest for rights. Too often, those of us who have access think that those who don't should vote, and we wonder why they do not. Citizenship is more than the vote. Citizenship is health care, it's child care, it's black kids not having disproportionate rates of asthma, it's black women not having negative outcomes in terms of maternal outcomes and lower baby weight than their white counterparts, irrespective of income. So we have to organize on the ground. We have to love each other. We have to convince different institutions locally to have deep empathy for black lives. And when we think about the Black Lives Matter movement and the policy agenda of a movement for black lives, they talked about policies that were not just dependent on the voting, but depending on all of us reimagining American democracy and making racial justice the beating heart of American democracy. So yes to voting, but we need to transform food deserts. We need to end racial segregation in our public schools and in our neighborhoods. And we need to have guaranteed income and health care and housing for all black communities in the United States. So we don't have just archipelagos of prosperity in the black community and vast searing racial wildernesses of disadvantage and police brutality and incarceration and premature death of black communities. So voting is a part of this, but until we educate and feed and house and clothe and employ every single member of that community, they're not going to use the voting rights that have been suppressed since 2013. So voting is only the tip of the spear. So when we think about the political sword and the political shield, voting is our shield, but that sword is organizing, educating, and agitating, and we're seeing it on the streets of America and globally. The only reason why corporations are saying Black Lives Matter is we have forced them to say that Black Lives Matter because we have democracy in the streets, and we've done what Dr. King tried to do in 1968, a poor people's campaign that was the first Occupy Washington movement that said nonviolent civil disobedience was going to be a political sword to transform American democracy, even when Americans didn't want that democracy to be transformed for Black people.
Tiffany, thank you very much. Dr. Joseph, Wes, and Anna, stay with me. Coming up, we're on the ground in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the city that was home to Black Wall Street in the early 20th century for a Juneteenth celebration. Plus, we're talking health and wealth in the Black community. Stay with us.
Juneteenth is another kind of Independence Day with a celebration of freedom, food, and family, especially food. And I think that that quality is still there very much with us. You know, it wasn't the Emancipation Proclamation necessarily that freed people. It was our efforts over the years to run away, to resist. It was Black people's own wills that set them free. They formed abolitionist groups, insurrections. They fought for their freedom.
Okay, everybody, we're back. Now, before I go back up to what I was reading out the the instrument, I'm going to reread the books and the title of the books, and then we'll get on down into your personal level of consciousness. Book number 1, once again, is The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Howard Griffith. Number 2, How to Stick It to the IRS by Sherry Peel Jackson. Number 3, The Federal Mafia by Irwin Schiff. Number 4, Black Labor, White Wealth by Claude Anderson. Number 5, Dirty Little Secret by Claude Anderson. Number 6, The Depth of Money by James Richards. Number 7, The Spook Who Sat by the Door by Sam Greenleaf. Number 8, Behold, a Pale Horse by William Cooper. Number 9, The ISIS Paper by Francis Cress Welsing. Now let's talk about your own level of personal level of consciousness. I know we often hear a lot of people try to describe to us as best they can about being conscious. What does that mean? When somebody tells you, asks you, are you conscious, what would be your answer? What is the first thing that you should do when asked that question? Because their definition of what it means to be conscious may be different from yours. So if someone asks me, brother, are you conscious? I would say, well, could you give me the definition of what consciousness is so that I can make sure that we're on the same page? Because as far as I'm concerned, consciousness is your level of understanding. And that should be based on what you know. See, once again, it's not enough for you just to have facts. How much truth are you attaching to each fact that you have? When it comes to your religious beliefs, if you're Christian or you're Muslim or you're Buddhist, regardless of what your beliefs are about something, what does your religious beliefs require you to do when you run into me or someone like me? What does your religion require you to do? Now, I asked these same questions in the previous broadcast, But as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to consciousness, what is it that you know? What is it that you know that opens your eyes so you do not think like the average individual? You do not react to certain things like other individuals, because your level of consciousness, which is rooted and grounded in what you know. Not enough to have the fact how much truth is attached to the facts you have. Okay? That's the best answer that I can give you when it comes to consciousness. What is it that you know for a fact that you have attached the truth to, and how well can you articulate what you know? Because you'll run into a whole lot of people who consider themselves conscious but knows absolutely nothing. And they'll hurl facts at you like rocks. But they can't verify anything because they have no truth. How many books do you read a month? How many materials relating to a higher level of knowledge do you have? So that's my answer to you in regards to consciousness. Now let's go back to disagreement. It states that number 6, the user consents and agrees that any and all such filings described in paragraph 4 and 5 above are not deemed to be unfair or unenforceable or unconscionable, and that the user will not claim that any such filing is false, frivolous, or vexatious, on the basis that in good faith secured party hereunder agrees to waive any obligation that arises from an innocent error or omission that is subsequently rectified by the user within 14 days of service of notice of this copyright infringement. Number 7, the user agrees that it is estoppel for claiming that it has not been notified the charges incurred for unauthorized use of secured parties' copyright names and intellectual property, and that is not bound by the conditions contained herein, following service and public notice of such. Number 8, the user appoints secured party as its authorized representative effective upon the user being found to be in default of his contractual obligations following service and a public notice of these terms as set forth on the payment terms and default terms. Below, granting secured party full authorization and power to engage in certain actions for and on behalf of the user, including but not limited by authentication of a record on behalf of the user. As secured party to a financing statement, and the user further consents and agrees that the appointment of secured party as authorized representative is effective upon user's default and irrevocable until redemption of his financial obligation to secured party. User further consents and agrees with all of the following additional terms of this self-executing security agreement in the event of unauthorized use. Okay, now I'm going to stop right here, and we'll come back, and then we'll go down into the payment terms, and that will be number 8. So I'm going to stop right here, and we'll take a little quick break. And keep in mind, this is a contract. Keep in mind, I told you, whoever creates the contract benefits them. The problem that we have been having is everybody else has been sending their contracts at us, and we've been accepting them, reacting to them as if that's the way life is supposed to be, instead of learning how to create our own contracts and send them the other way. An affidavit is a very, very powerful thing if you learn how to use it. And it's not that complicated. But if you do not know it, what you're doing, I recommend you learn that before you even attempt to do one. But anyway, what we're going over now is one that I created. Okay? Let's go down here and Because one of the questions is, how much does America owe Moors? Okay? Let's take a look at that, man.
250 years of slavery, decades of Jim Crow, housing discrimination, and other forms of systemic racism. All of that has led to this, a shocking wealth gap between black and white households in the United States. An average gap of $850,000 that, some experts believe, can be solved by something long overdue: reparations to the descendants of enslaved black people. But how do we even determine who's eligible for reparations? And can the struggle for reparations in other parts of the world teach us anything about what needs to be done in the U.S.? To understand why there's a call for reparations, there needs to be an understanding of the scale of slavery. It was a crime against humanity in which around 400,000 people were forcibly brought to North America. Over the centuries, 10 million enslaved people were legally treated as property in the United States, brutalized and ruthlessly exploited for free labor, which was used to establish the country as a leading global economy. In fact, one historian estimated that by 1860, enslaved people were, quote, worth some $3.5 billion, making them the largest single financial asset in the entire U.S. economy. That's around $115 billion today. When slavery was abolished in 1865, 4 million formerly enslaved African Americans were freed. But through their forced labor, they created billions of dollars in generational wealth for their captors, and none for themselves. Back then, the U.S. government understood the need for reparations and passed an order to distribute 40 acres and a mule to all formerly enslaved families so they could build wealth and financial security. However, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, President Andrew Johnson vetoed the allocation and returned the land to former slave owners. One way to reckon with America's past and current wealth disparity is through reparations that close the racial wealth gap.
You should make direct monetary payments to the eligible recipients.
That's economist William Darity. He co-authored the book From Here to Equality, which outlines one of the most comprehensive plans for what material reparations could look like.
So we estimate that this would require an expenditure of approximately $350,000 per eligible recipient. You get a figure of approximately $14 trillion.
Reparations for the crime of slavery and its legacy have long been a subject of national debate.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea.
And I think they're using what academics would call the theory of distance, that something is too far in the past to have contemporary application.
So it's easy to see why Congress has yet to pass H.R. 40, a bill that was proposed all the way back in 1989. It would set up a commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery and its subsequent racial and economic discrimination against African Americans. And while you cannot place a monetary value on slavery and its lasting effects, there's a precedent of reparations programs compensating victimized communities directly. Back in the U.S., the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 designated $20,000 payments to Japanese Americans who survived internment camps during World War II.
The U.S. government has also made payments in instances where it was not the culpable party. Payments made to families that lost loved ones during the course of the 9/11 attacks, as well as payments that are being made to individuals who were held hostage in Iran at the end of the Carter presidency.
Up to $4.4 million per hostage or their estates. In the case of slavery, the U.S. government did promise reparations. It just reneged on it. In fact, when the U.S. finally issued an apology for slavery, it included the disclaimer, "Nothing in this resolution authorizes or supports any claim against the United States or serves as a settlement of any claim against the United States." Nor did the U.S. ever provide true reparations, a process consisting of three things: acknowledgement, redress, and closure for grievous injustices.
It's vital that the federal government issue an apology, because that will create the justification for the redress plan that follows.
That brings us to who would actually receive reparations. Those direct payments would go to the roughly 47 million Americans who identify as black. But under Darity's plan, the requirements are a little more strict. First, black Americans would have to have identified as black, Negro, African American, or Afro-American for at least 12 years before any reparations plan goes into effect. And they'd have to prove that they had at least one ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. One way to do that is using the census. If your ancestor was present in the 1870 census and was old enough to have been alive in 1850 or 1860, but you can't find that person in the 1850 or 1860 census,
that would suggest that they were probably enslaved.
That's because before slavery was abolished with the 13th Amendment, enslaved people were not counted in the census.
They're actually missing people from the 1850 and 1860 census, and their absence there is a potential indicator that they were probably enslaved.
But while Darity's plan has received traction, it still faces opposition.
The impression down here is that Caribbean people who live in the United States, black people, would not be entitled to any reparation paid by the U.S. government. But we are saying that's not right. We are saying that's divisive of the black population in the United States. We are saying that Caribbean immigrants have been harmed by that system through racial profiling, discrimination.
See, the black population in the U.S. is pretty diverse. Most black people are foundational black Americans, meaning they're American descendants of enslaved people. Others are immigrants or the children of immigrants who came to the United States from mostly African and Caribbean countries. Those individuals may have ancestors who were enslaved, but wouldn't be considered eligible recipients for reparations in the United States.
Descendants of the enslaved have a claim that's linked directly to the failure to provide their ancestors with the promised 40-acre land grants. And that's uniquely a debt that is owed to the individuals who were enslaved and it was not met, and to their descendants. The second reason that's somewhat related is the fact that the current or existing racial wealth gap in the United States is a consequence of policies that have been pursued by the federal government that built white wealth to the detriment of black wealth.
A major policy Darity is referring to is the Homestead Act of 1862, or H.R. 125, legislation to, quote, secure homesteads to actual settlers of public domain. The policy incentivized citizens to move onto and settle land that had been violently stolen from indigenous nations. It provided 160-acre land grants to over 1 million white families for a small fee, but excluded the 4 million formerly enslaved people from the program who had already been denied the 40-acre land grants they'd been promised. Through the act, 270 million acres of land was settled across 30 states over 124 years. Remember, owning land generates income, and passing land down to the next generation builds wealth. So the consequences of that decision are seen today. Approximately 45 million living white Americans have benefited from this massive asset-building legislation.
I would argue that virtually all black people throughout the diaspora, the African diaspora, have a claim for reparations, but they don't all have a claim for reparations from the United States government.
The horrors of slavery and its consequences are not uniquely American. The transatlantic slave trade transported approximately 12.5 million enslaved Africans across the Americas. The overwhelming majority of enslaved Africans were shipped directly to Latin America and the Caribbean. Spain and Britain shipped around 1 million enslaved Africans just to Jamaica. By 1833, slavery was abolished throughout the British Empire. But instead of compensating formerly enslaved people, Britain provided reasonable compensation to slave owners through a then £20 million loan, which British taxpayers fully repaid in 2015. According to one estimate, that's worth over 20 billion British pounds today. For decades, descendants of enslaved people have been fighting for reparations in these regions, and in 2013, several Caribbean countries united to form the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which developed a strategy for reparations that focuses on reparatory justice.
The 10-point plan begins with the demand for an apology,
which is followed by calls for repatriation, an indigenous peoples development program, eradicating illiteracy, and debt cancellation, to name a few. CARICOM has sent letters requesting reparations from countries like Spain, France, Britain, and the Netherlands.
The response was negative for the most part, as no country admitted to the wrong, no country took responsibility, no country apologized, no country committed to repair.
Today, we're still living with the legacies of colonialism and enslavement that have left black populations across the globe at a disadvantage.
There is definitely a case that can be made that there has been a global pattern of exploitation of people of African descent.
We're here. The demand was owed to us from the United States government.
And despite incremental progress and different approaches to reparations programs, people across the Americas continue to fight for redress.
Right now, this is a contentious issue. It's affecting relationships, world relationships, global relationships, country versus country disputes exist. I think reparatory justice would help the society to heal itself. Both people of African descent, African people, and European people. I think it will be good and beneficial to all of us.
Reparations! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Reparations! When do we want it? Now! How do we want it? By any means necessary!
Okay, everybody, we back. Now, let us take a little quick break before I get down in these payment terms. And keep in mind, like I said early in the broadcast, we're going to convert this tonight's show. And we'll put it up on YouTube. And, of course, I'll throw it out on those social sites and do as much work on it as I can until it's time for us to do the next broadcast. Hopefully we've gotten over all of our technical difficulties with the switchboard here. And so I'm going to take a little quick break, and then when we come back, then we're going on down into some more. Now let's go on down here in these payment terms, and we are on number 8. It says the user hereby consents and agrees that it shall pay secured party all unauthorized use fees in full within 30 days of the date when notice of default changes is served by secured party, itemizing said charges and expressing the terms of payment. Hold on just a second here. Default terms. In the event of non-payment in full of all unauthorized use fees by the user within 30 days of the date notice of default charges is served, the user shall be deemed in default and agrees that a secured party will be granted a legal charge over the user's property, pledges, or collateral by the user as set forth above in paragraph 7 in parentheses 2. B. Secured party will be automatically appointed the user's authorized representative as set forth above in 7. C. The user consents and agrees that secured party may take possession of as well as otherwise dispose of in any manner that secured party deems appropriate, including but not limited by the sale and auction at any time following the user's notice of his failure to cure his default, and without further notice of court proceeding, any and all user's property and interest described above in paragraph 2 in respect of his self-executing security agreement in the event of unauthorized use that secured party deems appropriate. Terms of curing default. Number 10, in the event of default, irrespective of any and all users' former property and interest in property described above in paragraph 2, in the possession of as well as disposed of by secured party, the user may cure its default only by payment in full or by providing material evidence that demonstrates it breached the terms of this notice without being cognizant of the fact that it was doing so and without bad faith, in which case secured party may grant a waiver of the unpaid fees. Terms of strict foreclosure. Number 11, the user's non-payment in full of all unauthorized use fees within the 30-day period of curing default authorized secured party immediate non-judicial strict foreclosure on any and all of the pledged property and interest in property for which secured party will be granted a legal charge by the user until redemption. Miscellaneous. Number 12. Authorized use of Tarhaka of the family base and or derivatives of variations thereof and or internet use usernames, handlers, and cures the same unauthorized use fees as those associated with the trade names, trademark, and all derivatives and variations thereof, and intellectual property. This copyright notice applies to any and all legal fictions of any and all natures and descriptions owned and are used by secured party for any purposes whatsoever, and to all users of these legal fictions and intellectual property associated with the names, used without secured party's authorization, originally executed by Tarhaka of the Bay, Family Bay, under the seal on the 19th of November, 2021. I have the right to amend this common law copyright notice as and when necessary, and at my sole discretion. This copyright notice includes any and all business names owned by Tarhaka Bay, in all capital letters, and all derivatives thereof, autographed and sealed by secured party creditor Tarhaka Amana El Bay, and signature, thumbprint on the document, signature goes through it, dated 19th of November 2021, witnessed and signed by a witness, and I'm not going to tell you who that is. And the following pages is going on with signatures and dates and witnesses and the notary stamp. And that concludes this document. And when it comes to this particular document, just a moment. This does not necessarily mean that this has to be done in regards to your name. It could be anything that you designated to be, any kind of property or whatever you want. But this is a very, very professionally done piece of work, and I use it as a teaching tool to show people how to create their own contract. Now, let's go back to question number one. What can you do to save yourself? And my answer to that is to master your art of changing your status in commerce, or becoming fully aware of what's at your disposal inside the United States that you can do to defend yourself. And just keep in mind, I told you, everything in America operates on a continuous series of contracts under what is commonly known as contract law. The United States Corporation does not interfere with your right to make contracts. And when we fully understand this, we can use this as a tool to save ourselves. Now, that's not all you need to do. You have to have knowledge of self. If you are a Moor, well, my question to you would be, what is it that you know about a Moor? If you will say that whatever you see, one thing that was stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it said that every man, I think it's Article 14 or 15, I don't have it right here in front of me, it says every man and woman has the right to a nationality. And it also says in the very next verse that every man has a right to change his nationality as he see fit. Now that's recorded right there. So whatever you decide that your nationality is, my only question to you is, what is it that you know for a fact that you can attach truth to defend your position behind who you say you are? Are you just stating that, well, I'm a Moor, and you got probably about four or five pieces of paper that substantiates your claim? Well, if I say I'm a Moor, or if I say I'm an Egyptian, I'm gonna have a ton of information that can be verified. That's what I'm saying to you. Because see, what we just got to dealing with here a minute ago is that was a written contract. There are things called verbal contracts as well. So we're back to square one, and that's education, education, education. The next question was, how do your contract benefit you? Who, what, when, why, where, who says to benefits to be gained and losses to be avoided? And are the Moors in America truly free? Now, the plug answers those questions for you. So if I said I'm a Moor, then I need to be able to define for you what is the definition of a Moor. What does that mean? If I say I'm an Egyptian, or I'm a Kemetan, what is it that I know about it? You know, because if you say, well, I'm an Egyptian, well, okay, we have the great pyramids in Egypt. Okay, but what about the Egyptian pyramids and the whole underwater Egyptian cities with all the same identical stuff that's in Africa over here in America? What about that? Don't you think if you say that you are an Egyptian, don't you think that you need to know something about it on both sides of the ocean? I think so. Why would I omit part of it and just hold on to the other part somewhere else. That doesn't make any sense to me. If I'm going to deal with something, I'm going to deal with all of it. I'm going to be able to explain much more of it than the average individual, because I'm going to do an investigation. Because what am I doing? I'm increasing my level of consciousness. Now let's talk about something else. What about how do we be spiritual without being religious? How do you do that? Because many of us, we call ourselves a very spiritual people, but we're constantly regurgitating what some religious figures say. How do you get around that? If you are spiritual, why don't you try simply being righteous? Why don't you try some of that? All right, we'll be right back. Y'all hold on a minute.
Hi, I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American History. The number of Black Americans that served in the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II was unprecedented. And yet, the patriotism that so many Black people demonstrated through their service didn't protect them from racism. The armed forces remained segregated in World War II, and Black soldiers and their women's auxiliary units were regularly disregarded and mistreated. It is a cruel and tragic irony that while the United States was ostensibly fighting a war to end fascism, they continued to treat Black Americans, even those willing to die for their country, as second-class citizens. Still, Black Americans were an essential part of the war effort, and it's important to remember how they contributed to the cause both at home and abroad. Let's start the show. In 1940, there were less than 10,000 Black members of the U.S. Armed Forces, but by the end of the war, that figure had risen to 1.2 million, and over 2.5 million had registered for the draft. Still, despite this rapid growth, segregation limited the nature of the duties Black soldiers were assigned to, and restricted the possibility for upward mobility. Despite all that they had done for the American military in previous wars, many still considered Black soldiers to be too cowardly to fight, too inept to execute military strategy, and too unfit to lead others. Black and white military personnel had been divided into separate units since the Civil War, and during World War II, they continued to be kept in separate facilities. There were segregated sleeping quarters, transportation, canteens, and even church services. Black women also experienced segregation and discrimination in the auxiliary care units that were designed for women who wished to serve as nurses and cooks during the war. World War II arrived in an era when gender roles were finally beginning to change. Following the Great Depression of the 1930s, many women entered the workforce because they needed more money to provide for themselves and their families. And the call to join the war effort brought even more women into the labor force. And they were welcome. Well, at least the white women were. Wartime may have necessitated that America change its mind on some issues, but racism wasn't really one of them. So while Black women were able to join the civilian corps, it didn't mean that they would be treated well once they were a part of it. There were organizations designed for each branch of the military that promised career opportunities for women who joined the war effort, including the Women's Army Corps, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Services, and Women's Air Force Service Pilots. While many white women could expect to receive medical training, earn leadership roles, or in the case of the Air Force, even operate aircrafts, Black women who joined were largely relegated to menial labor. For example, at Fort Devens, a military base in Boston, Massachusetts, Black women who were part of the Army Corps were promised training as medical technicians, but were instead relegated to positions as hospital orderlies. Despite these limitations, Black women distinguished themselves in service. Prior to an intervention by Eleanor Roosevelt, Black women in the Women's Army Corps, or WACs, were not stationed overseas. The first group of black WACs arrived in Europe in February 1945. This was the 688th Central Postal Directory Battalion. The first huge assignment given to those 855 women, you ask? The mailroom. When these WACs arrived, they found a system backlogged and a building stacked to the ceiling with mail. There was also a room filled with gifts, food, and rodents. Charity Adams, one of only 2 black women promoted to major during World War II, was commander of the unit. By dividing women into 3 8-hour shifts and sorting more than 65,000 pieces of mail during each shift, the unit was able to clear these rooms in less than 3 months. Over the course of the war effort, black American women suffered mistreatment from all kinds of people: white, black, men, and women. Such was the case for Lieutenant Gertrude Marguerite Ivory Bertram, a black member of the Army Nurse Corps who served as a nurse at Fort Bragg and the West African Theater during World War II. She recorded several accounts of her experience that give us insight into the expectations versus the realities of black women who joined the fight. Let's go to the thought bubble. So there was Bertram, minding her business at a train station with a first-class ticket to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. At the time, Fort Bragg was one of few bases that accepted black nurses. She was traveling under government orders and was legitimately excited about her first-class trip until a black Pullman porter started causing a scene. A Pullman porter was sort of like a flight attendant, but for trains. See, when she booked the ticket, no one asked her what her race was. Then, when she arrived and produced her ticket, it immediately became a problem. The porter told her that she was causing trouble and said to her face, "Girl, you are out of your place." But at this time, survival for black people meant compliance, even if it meant preventing other black people from trying to exercise their rights. After going back and forth with Gertrude, he put her in a drawing room on the train and wouldn't let her into the dining room car or even the restroom. She arrived at Fort Bragg to find it segregated as well. She later recounted a moment in which she collapsed trying to make it up a hill one night when it was too dark to see. 2 white nurses grabbed her on each side to pull her up, but when they reached the top of the hill and the moonlight revealed her skin color, they dropped her back on the ground. Thanks, Thought Bubble. It was initially difficult for Bertram to wrap her head around these early experiences. She struggled to reconcile the dignity and respect she'd earned during nursing school and the humiliation she experienced when she joined the war effort. She understood that the white women who helped her could have been ostracized by others for helping her, and she also understood that the Pullman porter could have lost his job for allowing her to sit in first class. But who was there to have empathy for her? Bertram's experiences highlight only a fraction of what black men and women went through during the war. Still, they offer a picture of how truly extraordinary it was for those who were able to excel amid incessant discrimination. All black or predominantly black units, like the 320th Anti-Aircraft Barrage Balloon Battalion or the 761st Tank Battalion, became shining emblems of black resilience and triumph. These battalions bulldozed their way through the hate in Europe from both their adversaries and their allies, and emerged as formidable and honorable soldiers. The only all-black divisions to fight in both World War I and World War II were the 92nd Infantry Division and the 370th Infantry Regiment. The 92nd Infantry Division, referred to as the Black Unit, was comprised of approximately 15,000 men and commanding officers. The 370th Infantry Regiment was called the Black Devils and had the coveted distinction of being the only black regiment to have all black officers. And then there was the Tuskegee Airmen, affectionately known as the Red Tails. They got their nickname when they became members of the 332nd Fighter Group. These pilots flew P-51 Mustangs to escort bomber pilots into enemy territory. The airmen's highly lauded performances stood out and contributed to a growing sense that black people should be fully integrated members of the U.S. Armed Forces. This group was formed in 1941 and it was based in Tuskegee, Alabama. After extensive training on the local Army airfield, college students who matriculated through this program became the first black military aviators in the U.S. Army Air Corps, which would later become the Air Force. Besides pilots, the program also produced navigators, bombardiers, aircraft mechanics, and more. During their time of service, these men flew more than 15,000 missions in Europe and North Africa during World War II. By the war's end, they'd earned more than 150 distinguished flying crosses. While these remarkable black contributions on the war front were an important step to post-war military integration, there was still a lot more work to be done on the home front. Seasoned labor organizer and socialist A. Philip Randolph proposed a March on Washington in 1941 that would change the entire trajectory of treatment of African Americans. No, I'm not talking about the March on Washington pulled off by Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and Dr. Martin Luther King over 20 years later. This March on Washington was more of a movement because, in the end, the march itself didn't actually have to happen. Well, not yet anyway. The March on Washington movement was the most militant black political operation in the early 1940s. It was created to call out segregation in the armed forces and demand President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration treat black soldiers fairly. We'll learn more about this in an upcoming episode. But through his rallying and petitioning, Randolph made his plans to march on the Capitol public knowledge. As plans for the march raised concerns for race relations, it caught President Roosevelt's attention. On June 25, 1941, he signed Executive Order 8802, which prohibited, quote, discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries or government because of race, creed, color, or national origin. The Roosevelt administration also brought forth the Fair Employment Practices Commission to address workplace discrimination. Another crusade black people took up during the 1940s was the Double V campaign, led by James G. Thompson. This newspaper marketing campaign was meant to remind Americans that while there was fighting against fascism going on abroad, there was a lot of work to do in the fight against racism here at home. From being stuffed in mailrooms to do menial work to facing Jim Crow thousands of miles from home, black men and women faced ongoing discrimination and mistreatment while continuing to exceed the expectations of their compatriots over and over again. Take the Tuskegee Airmen, for example. When stationed in Sicily in 1944, they were forced to operate second-hand P-40 airplanes that were much slower than their German counterparts. But when moved to Italy and given the opportunity, they shot down 12 German bombers in 2 days in those exact same second-hand planes. As has been the case in wars throughout American history, without the contributions of black soldiers and civilians, the outcome of the war may have looked very different. It's important that we always take the time to acknowledge the ways black folks have always fought for a country that doesn't always fight for them, and the way they did it with bravery, dignity, and respect. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course is made with...
Okay, we're back. I think the brother said a mouthful. Now I want you to notice something. When he told you the story about the nurse that went to the train station for the first class ticket that they gave a military officer, a nurse, and on her way to the Carolina. Who was it that created the commotion? It was a porter on the train that looked just like her. And that, my friend, is a shame. Wow. Incredible. Now keep in mind, the same identical spirit that happened to her way back then, the same kind of spirit is upon our people today. That is amazing. It still exists all the way up into the 21st century, all the way over in the year 2022, the same kind of spirit. I come to the conclusion It doesn't matter what you do. You can heal the sick and raise the dead, and you still going to have somebody who look just like you but don't like you. Wow, amazing.
Tellingly, these scenes only begin to appear after the arrival of the Mongoloid. Conquest by the Mongoloids would explain why there are no Aborigines in the Americas today.
As long as they were on the reservation, they were Indian. As soon as they left in the reservation, for whatever reason, they became free people of color. Then finally they became African Americans, same people. And you can see it in the lifetime of a single individual. This journey, it changes in classification. In classification.
Welcome to Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast. This is Big VG on the check-in. Today's conversation, we're going to talk about some history. We're going to talk about the first Americans. We're going to talk about the original Americans. We're going to talk about the Aborigines. And we're just going to have like conversation about like what direction is this platform going, the Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast. Like what direction are we going, right? We're going to have that conversation today. And we're going to, of course, we're going to produce a couple of sources. And, like all of our conversations, you can find the sources in the description box, right? You can click on the link. You can read it yourself in its entirety. You can fact check, when you have a conversation about history or whatever, it's always good to get the source from the person. You don't really want to take anybody's word for it. Because, truth be told, the American Negro is in the position that we're in because all we ever did was take folks' word. You know what I'm saying? And then, even with that, my goodness, talking about taking somebody's word, we took the devil's word for it. So whatever the devil say, many of us as American Negroes, we just regurgitate it, right? We don't dig in those crates, right? We don't dig in those libraries. We don't go back and get those older, earlier works that writers and explorers talked about. We just don't do it. But today is a new day. We're learning different things. We're reading different things. We're challenging the status quo, right? We just don't take it like, we got a couple of elders still hanging around to these old stories, right? These stories are outdated, but we holding on. But those stories is not going to last long, right? Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, the direction that we go in is based on the comments. The comments is the engine and the fuel to the machine, right? So dig this, right? Going over the comments, there was a brother, and he was a little confused, right? He was like, when I listen to more recent conversations, it sounds like it's a little different, than your older conversations. Like it's almost sound like you're saying the opposite thing. So of course, we're not here to confuse anybody. And with that being said, we're just gonna show up a particular position that we have on this platform. Now, here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we have always taught from day one that the original man, the black man, was in the Americas prior to the slave trade and prior to Columbus even finding this place, right? He found the place with a whole bunch of people on it. Dig that, right? When we say that, what tends to happen is that if you listen to our older conversations, right, we're kind of like, a lot of that is geared toward a community that call themselves, we gave them the label, possibly. We call them the Aboriginal community, right? And these are a group of people that says, they're American Negroes. They say that we was always here, which I could connect with, right? But they do something a little different. They take a pivot. And they say that they are the original Indians. And when they say they are the original Indians, they do that in terms of like Red Indian nations. So our people began to call themselves Cherokee and Choctaw and Chickasaw and Cheyenne and Lakota and, et cetera, et cetera. This is what our people was doing. Now, in a sense, it's like, as we used to say on older conversations, it's looked like, it's the Red Indian train is on the move. And it's a bunch of Negroes, American Negroes, they're trying to jump on that train. They're not doing that because this is something to do. What's actually happened is that, you got some voices, some guys, they're like YouTube famous, right? It's a Callaway guy. It's a guy we call Miho here, right? And there's a few others, and they say things such as, when I say they, I mean the Aboriginal community, saying things like, the African slave trade never existed, it never happened, right? They say things like that. They say things like, Big Mama said she was Indian, right? They say things like that. They say things like, what else do these guys say? They do this. It's like they do what I call picture scholarship too. They kind of match up these pictures, right, with these ancient monuments, but check it out. At the end of it all, this is what's happening. In doing so, it's kind of like our people, they really don't explain to our people their position in this territory in the West that we call the Americas, right? So you can see maybe 450, maybe 500 Red Indian tribes. And if you tell our people that they're Indian and you don't do it properly, they will think that they are the real Indian from a Red Indian nation. So now you got American Negroes saying they're the original Cherokee. They're the original Choctaw. They're the original blase, 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 right? And then while they're doing that, they're kind of like throwing some cold water on the fact that they're mixed with the African. You see what I'm saying? So they minimize the African part of them, and they maximize what I would consider like the Red Nation, but they're doing it out of error almost. So if you listen to our older conversations, what we do, we try to bring the balance to, because that's what's going on, right? The truth be told, though, is that here on Real Black Consciousness Forum Podcast, we stand on and we show and prove that when it comes to the West, right, the American Negro is found in I'm talking about in large numbers, Central America, South America, and the islands, right? When we talk about the territory that we call the United States, it's California and Florida. Everywhere else is like small pockets, right? We could be found in the Carolinas. We can come all the way down from Virginia to the Carolinas, to Alabama, Tennessee, and then you got Mississippi, Louisiana. And then also, we're going to speak on later about Negroes in Canada. But we're talking about small pockets of people. Now, the thing about it when I say small pockets is that, dig this, the territory that we call the United States was never heavily populated by red people neither. This whole, that's the kind of like the issue I got with Jack Forbes. Like, he's a guy, he's a scholar, but he kind of paints this picture like there's millions and millions of people here. And there never was millions and millions of people in the territory that we call the United States. It just wasn't so, right? There were always pockets of people that was here. So how I see these Aboriginal guys is this. This is kind of like what they do that we totally disagree with on this platform. See, the American Negro was always here. You can't be a Cherokee, in my estimate. You can't be a Choctaw, in my estimate. You can't be none of these Red Indian tribes, in my estimate, because you, as the American Negro, was already here before they got here. So how did you become a Cherokee when you was here before them? So in all transparency, like if you listen to we kind of clown these guys a little bit. Well, we don't kind of, we clown them a little bit. Like, they running around saying the slave trade never happened, and they talking about, I'm the real Choctaw. And I'm like, you going from one oppressor to another oppressor. Check this out. Let me say it this way, right? Let me say it this way. The there was a part in our development as American Negroes where we were Christians, right? And I want to put a time on it, so I'm going to say, let's just say the early 1920s, right? The bulk of our people was converted to Christians, which is a Jewish religion, right? So to some respect, as an American Negro, if your religion is Christianity, you're underneath Jews. You may not see it that way, but you're underneath Jews, right? I don't care what color you make the Jews. You can do that whenever you want to do that. That's your business. But you're underneath Jews, right? Then came like a deeper sense of black consciousness, right? And it started to arise after the 1920s. And we wanted to be closer to self. We wanted to be closer to, like, it was a blackness kind of thing. It was a opening movement that we was kind of like spiritually and soulfully we're changing. In this change, many of our people became Muslims, right? Because we felt that Islam was our truest self, right? Islam is our truest self. And then before you know it, we start, bumping our head on the ground 5 times a day. We start praying to Mecca, you know what I'm saying? We start visiting Mecca. And what actually happened was we went from following these Jewish devils to running behind these Arab devils. And we feel like when we was running behind these Arab devils, we was closer to ourselves. But when you see our people jump from Judaism or Christianity to Arabism or Mohammedanism, that's pretty much what we was doing. And we felt like we was being closer to ourselves. In a sense, that's how I feel like the Aboriginal community is doing. They're not teaching our people that you were here before these Cherokees ever came around. They're not doing that. They're kind of doing something different. They got a different song and dance. Here on Real Black Consciousness Forum podcast, we teach this like, see, the American Negro, if you look at it in a sense, the black man is almost the last person here in the United States, right? It's a weird way we put it, though, because, see, first of all, when we talk about the Southeast Territory of the United States, and we're going to touch on Ohio today as well, the Midwest. See, the people that build the mounds, we call them mound builders. There's a sect of us with knowledge of self that when we talk about pre-Columbian, American Negroes, we use the term mound builders. We are the people that built the mounds. That separates you from trying to be a person of a red Indian nation, because even in their own tribal testimony, I don't care if they're Chickasaw or they're Cherokees or they Choctaw, they admit they did not build those mounds. They admit that it was another race of people that built those mounds already. When they got to these territories, those mounds was already there. These tombs was already there. These ancient relics was already there. They had nothing to do with that. They admit to that in their own tradition. What we're saying is that our people was the ones that was already here. That's it. That rubs a lot of our Afrocentric brothers the wrong way, because they got this thing in their head. They want everybody to be from Africa, right? It's like a very weird dynamic when it comes to them. Like everybody that's black, they got the same paint job as the African had to somehow come from Africa. But see, the original man, as the messenger taught us, the original man, we don't have a birth record. You can't put a date on us. You can't put a territory on us. We're the original people of the planet. We was always here. So it's kind of weird, and I use this example often. When it comes to like these Afrocentric guys, they do what we call like the thin air approach. So when we talk about the American Negro, he had to come from somewhere. He had to migrate from Africa there, because he couldn't just always be here. So we can show him, we can show and prove that archaeologists can date back Negro skulls for thousands of years in Brazil. And then, the Afrocentric guys say, well, he came from Africa. And then we can say, well, what about the Negroes in Solomon Island? So, well, he came from Africa. You say, well, what about the Negroes, the Aboriginals in Australia? Oh, well, he came from Africa. They got this little thing. They make everybody from Africa. And then they say, well, life started in Africa. And then in the very same breath, they'll tell you about taking an ancestry test. And I'm like, well, beloved, if everybody comes from Africa, what are you running around taking an ancestry test? We're going to all go back to Africa, right? So that means that the German is African, you know, that the Swedish guy is from African, the Arab is really African, the Chinese guy is really African. No, they don't do that. They just put the African label on the people that got the same paint job as the African. But it's kind of unique because, see, the African Negro can come out of thin air. He don't have no origin. He just always was here. So I guess it's something about the water, the air, I don't know. It's something about that landmass that it can just produce the Negro out of thin air, the African Negro out of thin air. But the American, something about, I guess the air is different over here in the Americas. It just can't produce the Negro out of thin air, or Solomon Islands, or Australia, or wherever we are, right? When we talk about the Americas, though, many of us with knowledge of self, and this is different than the Aboriginals. We don't say that the American Negro was the only people here in the territory that we call the United States. There was never a landmass. There's never going to be a continent with one kind of people on it. Even when the explorers got here, when they talked about and they used the term Indian, they said the Indians came in all shades: yellow, brown, red, and black. We skip and overlook the black part all the time. No matter where he went, North America, South America, we skip the fact that there was Negroes here. We just overlook it. Not us. But this is how many of our Afrocentric brothers do. Right? So that's what's kind of going on in our earlier conversations up until now. Now we have more of a pivot because we was underneath the impression that all American Negroes knew there was no such thing as 100 million Africans coming over here on the slave trade. We just took that for granted. So, you know, of course, this conversations that we have on this platform, it's geared by the comments. So we're just looking at the comments and we're like, yo, there's no way our people believe that now. So now this is the part of history that we're on. We talk about Negroes being in the Americas prior to the slave trade, because the way it works when you do the knowledge, right, sound and right reasoning, we are a mixture of people, the American Negro. So the American Negro was always here. And then we have a slave trade that happens later. So the slave trade brought two different kind of groups here. It brought the East Indian here, and it brought the African here. But the way that they was pushing the slave codes on our people is that we couldn't mix with the so-called devil. We couldn't do it. We had to mix with other people of color. We was all in a melting pot together. So, you know, I can procreate with a Mexican or a Red Indian or another American Negro or an African or East Indian. It didn't matter because we was all in the same melting pot together. All in the same mixing pot if you're from the North, right? That's going to bring out a new species. So this is how I use that. I kind of flip it. I say, yo, the black man was technically the last person here, but at the same time, we was the first person here because we're new now. We're like gumbo now. So if Aboriginals come like, oh man, you original, and they start naming tribes, brother, you know, or sister, you know, even the elders always taught us that the Negro lost the knowledge of himself, of our religion. We stripped of our, you know, our native tongue. We stripped of the knowledge of self. That only applies to the American Negro. Everybody else know who they are. The African know who he is. He come over, he already know. He ain't trying to figure nothing out. The red man know who he is. The Mexican know who they is. And we're going to have a conversation about the origin of the Mexican, because it's not what you think, but that's going to come later. Everybody know who they are. They've never been stripped of anything, but the American Negro, he's confused. Even our brothers in the Caribbean, they know who they are.
This is what we do here. This is telling you about the Garifuna people, how they came. They're combined of three cultures put together.
Okay.
The Caribbean, the Arawak Indian, and the African.
Okay.
Yeah. No, these Garifuna people are the pre-Columbus African, before the slave trade began. No, these Garifuna people are the pre-Columbus African, before the slave trade began. No, these Garifuna people are the pre-Columbus African, before the slave trade began.
What's the Islanders? Is that it?
Who are the Caribs?
And they're from South America, right? Or like the Guyanas?
Yeah.
And the
Well,
Guyanas.
who are they?
Not sure.
You have to do your history, friend.
Yeah.
Where do you think the black people here come from?
I'm not sure. It's either like slave ship or they came from Africa, right? What do you think?
We've never been African.
Never.
We've never been African.
They don't really say on.
We're not really African. We are the Caribs.
Right.
We are the Caribs. Our ancestors are the Caribs. We man this. We control this. We inhabited this. Yeah. The sea was named for us, the Caribbean. We are the Caribs. The Africans came after. The Africans came after.
The Africans came after.
But the Afrocentric guys, they're very unique because what they do is when you start to learn about yourself, they act as an overseer to tell you where you're from. And they only tell you where you're from because you got the same pay job as them. So they give you this whole song and dance that you got an African ancestry. And beloved, believe me when I tell you, 99.9% of the time, when you see an American Negro talking about an African ancestry, he cannot point out anybody in his line that's from Africa. Not one single person, not one. America is his ancestral homeland, him or her. But it's just the weirdest thing. Like, it's weird, man. You just can't. It's weird. Now, the reason why that we give, the reason why we accept the slave trade is because, first of all, our big mamas can remember when they was here, Africans coming over and working on the plantation with them. That's number one. Number two, the slave trade is well documented. It's well documented. Nobody ain't faking up this stuff, and even here we talk about the essential contract, right? So it's well documented about the slave trade. That's number two. Number three is this, right? Check this out. Being that it's well documented, being that many of our big mamas can remember the African coming over, the numbers that they give us, it's not mathematically possible for that to happen. Our brother W.B. Du Bois was the first one to go on record to provide a number. We know where he got that number from, right? He got that number. He didn't get that number from his big mama or somebody else. That we're going to one day call out the name of the person that gave him that number. And he ran around and touted, him, W.B. Du Bois, that 100 million Africans came over here on the slave trade, right? Even him telling you that and me that, he couldn't name one person in his line that came from Africa. It's like a reoccurring thing. The American Negro was telling other American Negroes that came from Africa. But the one that's telling you that, he can't point no African out of his family. See, that's the weird dynamic. And then you get another guy named Dr. Henry Clark. So if you go through the comments, you have guys on our platform, they're commenting about every single statement that we make. But nobody says nothing about how you go from 100 million Africans to a guy named Professor Henry Gates that all of a sudden he said it was 12 million. Nobody never comments on how did you miscount 88 million people. They're commenting about the intro, how you bring this, you made this, anything that's opinionated that I make, because this is a very opinionated platform. We having a conversation. They have something to say about that part. When we start talking about the documents and we're reading, they don't complain about the sources. They don't complain about W.B. Du Bois telling our people that 100 million Africans came over. They say nothing about that. They only want to point out when I start being opinionated, because we just having a conversation. And in a conversation, we all have our opinions. But let's talk about the 100 million Africans that came over. If we're going to drop a comment, let's talk about that. Let's not skip over everything else. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. How did you go from 100 million to 12? Like, how does that happen? Nobody says nothing about a miscounting of 88 million people. Let's stop and think about that. How can you miscount 88 million people? They never want to, these Afrocentric guys never want to talk about that. They want to make a comment about everything else we talk about but that. They skip that part every video. And we keep talking about it to somebody. Let's talk about it. We're going to keep talking about it to somebody address it. Nobody never addresses, right? But maybe that's a different story for a different day. Today, folks, we're going to talk about the congressional record, and it's going to be the proceedings and debates. This is the 53rd Congress, the second session. This was produced in 1894, right? And we're just going to read a portion of it. Of course, we're going to put the link in the description bar. But we're going to start right at page 7687. And we're going to go down to, let's say, the second paragraph, right? And they're talking about the skulls that's found in the Americas. We're going to go up one paragraph, right? In a sense, we're going to start where it says, we are therefore quite confident that our material, so carefully collected and thoughtfully weighed, would not be cast aside and its usurped by the rash statements of hastily and incompetent investigators. While there should be so much speculation and uncertainty concerning the life of our aborigines is inexplicable to us. No question of equal importance could have been more easily determined have the early writers given as much impatience to mild exploration as is given at this present time, right? So right off the bat, this is a congressional record, right? So we're talking about, we're talking about the highest office of the land. We're talking about those that move and shake what happens in the country. This is a congressional record, and they're having a conversation about the people of the Americas. And then they're talking about the mound builders and how they've been doing their research on it. And what they did was they're saying, we kind of put the people before our investigation. The people they're talking about is the Red Indians, right? That's what they're talking about. But we're going to go down to the next paragraph, and then we're going to skip the one in the middle. Conclusions. The skeletons of the brachycephalic people in the collection and examined from the Great and Little Miami valleys and those of Scioto in Ohio suggest that they were strong and well built. Let's skip down to the next paragraph. No skeletons of gigantic size were discovered, and there was but little doubt that the progenitors of the American race were in the height subject to the same variations in structure which are to be remarked among our recent tribes. Okay, let's stop. Let's build on that. So there was like this rumor that when you start looking at the mounds and everything like that, they were built by giants. Like, oh, some giants, people, some giants, it's like it's a trend. When you see the Negro worldwide build anything, I don't care if it's the pyramids in Kemet, I don't care if it's great civilizations in Africa, or Brazil, or Central America, or the territory that we call the United States, they always make it spooky. Like it was some giants, some outer aliens came from somewhere and they built it and did this and did that. They're doing the same thing here. They're like, it was giants that built it. But at this congressional record, they're just like, no, it wasn't no gigantic people built nothing. These is regular people that came and built that. But let's see in that estimate who the regular people was, right? So we're going to go down just a little bit where it says, right here where it says, we cannot overlook, right? And it says, we cannot overlook the fact that the crania and skeletons examined by us, many of them excavated by our own hands, approach somewhat the Negro in its anatomical characteristics. Let's stop. Congressional hearing. They're trying to figure out who built the mounds. Who came up? The Negro came up. Let's go on a couple of sentences, right? Because we're going to clear it all the way up with a couple of sentences down. It says, none of the characteristics of the Mongolian or the Mongoloid types are present in any of the Ohio crania which we have examined. Let's stop. Am I cherry picking? Does that sound like I'm cherry picking? Oh, brother VJ, man, you just be picking out certain parts. You cherry picking, brother. The American Negro ain't Indian. No, we ain't Indian. We got here before the Indians. Indians weren't even here yet. When we talk about black Indians, we use that in the truest sense of the word, like Aborigines or Aboriginal. That's like, we was the first one here. Now, it can be one first, right? Dig that. You can only have one first Americans. we're never saying on this platform that we were the only people here. But if, you know, somebody trying to pull rank and a red man is running around in our conversations, you know, we just talking about our history. We're talking about our story. Unfortunately, you know, these conversations can be made easier because, see, we got black scholars that have been saying this for years, on top of years that the Negro was already here. But see, our people they're not like that. They don't want to hear from our people. Our people believe in devils. We like to hear the devil say it. Yo, if you ever check this out, if you ever hear an American Negro running around talking about he need to learn this from a credible source, I need to hear this from a credible source, he is really saying, I want to hear a devil say this. It's not real until a devil say this. That's what that means, right? So now you can't get any bigger devils than they sitting in the seat of politics in the United States on a congressional record, and everything's going to be documented, and this is what they're talking about. And then your people, the American Negro, they come up. So much so that they make a difference. No. These were Negroes in the mounds in Ohio. These were Negro skulls here, not Mongoloid. So ask yourself, who was here first? You can answer that yourself. Is that cherry picking? Now, this is why we have an issue with the Aboriginal community. How are you Cherokee, bro? Sis? How? You was already here before they got here. How? You running around, you know, you showing up at these folks' powwows and all this shit. Like, yo, you look bananas to us. Don't you know you was here before them? You don't know they jumping around with them loud color clothes on. You don't know none of that Siberian shit that they doing. You don't know none of that Palestinian shit that they doing. Did you catch what I said? I say it again. You don't know none of that Siberian shit that they doing. You don't know none of that Palestinian shit that they doing. Because these natives is a mixture of a couple of different groups. Uh-oh. You didn't think we knew that, did you? Yo, we're going to break this conversation down in the future. Why do you think the Palestinians, right, is so close to the Native Americans? You ever ask yourself that? No, you never did. You're running around, you know, you've been African. I don't get our people. You running around trying to be African so bad, you never just paid attention to the people that's right around you. You never paid attention to why certain people are so comfy and cozy with one another. You just never paid attention to it. We're going to have a good conversation about that. Because the messenger taught us, the people that call Indian, he taught us how they arrived here. Nobody walked on here. That whole stupid story about they came across the Bering Strait and they got to Alaska and they kept walking down through Canada and all the way through the United States and they kept walking all the way to South America and they got down to the backside of Chile and they populated everywhere in between. Man, that's the stupidest story I ever heard in my life, and American Negroes regurgitate that. But then again, what do you expect? This guy thinks 100 million Africans came over here on the slave ship. In the 1600s? Oh, let's stop that. Coming back from the 1500s through the 1600s through the 1700s. When did they invent the steamboat? When they started putting an engine in these boats? 100 million, they just sailed over, huh? And you regurgitate that? We got a lot of work to do. No, beloved, some of these folks that we call the natives is Palestinians. Right? Look, let me share this with you, right? Because we just talking, right? Dig this. The messenger taught us that, he taught us about how the African came over, and there was 2 waves of Africans that came over. And in our next conversation, we're going to really sit down and chop that up, how that happened, right? And then we're going to back that up with the Library of Congress, because we got some testimonies of some Negroes, grandmama that came on a boat from Africa. So we're going to have a good conversation about that. That red man, though, he came over
until a couple years ago. Last year, PLO came.
They came
here, yeah.
to Pine Ridge?
middle
The
of the night.
Palestinian Liberation Organization came to Pine Ridge. Yeah?
And they called me in the middle of the night and said, "Where's the town? We want to meet with you." So I didn't know what they were going to meet about, you know. And so I said, "Okay, let's meet in the morning." So we had a shade over there. So we had good together, and they came and they were told me to get Richard Brokenose. So I went out and got him. And here he was part of the delegation that went to Spain years ago. And they wanted to know, Parliament wanted to know where we came from as Lakota people. And I said, how do you arrive at that? He said, well, 100 years ago there were 10 tribes, and they only found 7. And since then we found 2 in the last 100 years. But we never found the 10th one. And then we think it's a Lakota nation. So how do you arrive at that? And he said, well, God gave a gift to each of the 9 bands. And we're the 10th. We're the only tribe in the USA that got a gift from God. So that's what they concluded, the way they think from. And there's 11 Muslim nations are looking at you. If you say yes, we are part of it, then it'll help you, 11 nations. And that's where that.
And so the Muslim nations believe the Lakotas are one of their...
one of their bands.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
He resided in the territory that we call today Palestine. Some may call it Israel, but I like to use the term Palestine. And he lived there for centuries. The Phoenicians brought many of these so-called red nations over to the territory that we call America. The Phoenicians brought them here on boats. Before they got here on boats, we know Phoenicians is Negroes. Before they got here on boats, they resided again in the territory that we call Palestine. So now let's fast forward today. This is why the Palestinians, I don't care, for the last 100 years, if not more, when it comes to this territory, again, that we call the United States, the first people that they want to see is their brothers and their sisters. And who are their brothers and sisters? They run to the Native Americans. That's their people, beloved. Uh-oh. You didn't know that, did you? I know, you so busy being African, you ain't paying attention to what's going on around you. I get it.
I've got a question. I want to sort this out. I want to get the update on something. I may have mentioned this before, but I want to dedicate this video directly to this question. Is it possible that the Native Americans were actually derived from a Jewish background, a Hebrew background, out of the 12 tribes? I've heard a theory before that the Native Americans actually were part of a lost tribe of Israel, as compared to simply being of Asian descent and crossing over through the Bering Strait and sailing down.
That's why they have the story in their traditions and moved on to the Southeast territory that we call the United States. They didn't come, they wasn't always here. They wasn't always here. They were brought here. They came out of the mountains. Maybe that's a different story for a different day, right? Today we're talking about the mound builders. We're just going to talk about the mound builders, and we're using a congressional record that when they was looking at the mounds in Ohio, they found the Negro skull there, not the Mongoloid. So let's go one step further. We're going to talk about another source, right? Because we're in the late 1800s. We're going to bring it all full circle shortly, right? There's another source we're going to use. It's called the Miscellaneous Notes and Queries, and this was produced in 1892, right? So we're in the late 1800s with it, right? And what I want to do is I want to show you the range of thought pattern from devils, right? Let's go right into the source. Let's go right into the source. We're going to go to page 147, where it says the Adamic race, right? The Adamic race. Reply to area Doctors Young and Blackie on the Negro. Bullet point 1. The Negro does not belong to the Adamic species. Bullet point 2. He is not a descendant of Adam and Eve. Bullet point 3. He is not the offspring of Ham. Bullet point 4. He is not a beast. He is a human being, right? No shit, Sherlock. Bullet point 5. He has an immortal soul, but not after the image of God. Bullet point 6. And every attempt to civilize him after our forms has resulted in a speedy and certain destruction, right? Which makes sense because the original man can't follow after the ways of the devil. It's just not going to work. By MS, the unity of the human race is unscriptural, contrary to the laws of science and destructive to the welfare of every species of man. New York, 1868. Let's stop. Let's talk about this real quick. What's going on is this. There's an individual named Ariel. He's a devil. And they're going back and forth about the position of the Negro. They're trying to figure out whence did the Negro come? What is his beginning? Like, where did this guy come from? Now, the messenger teaches us that the Negro don't have a birth record, right? So that's very key because that's what I always say to my Afrocentric brothers. Yo, we don't have a, you can't point to a time where there was no Negroes anywhere. Like, it's not going to happen, beloved. It's not possible. You can't, nobody can point to a continent and say, oh, this is when the first Negro got here, or this is when the first Negro got there, because the Negro don't have a birth record. We don't have a beginning. There never was a time on any land that you can't point to a Negro or when was the first Negro got there. That doesn't even make sense. Nobody has the power to tell you from another group where you were. Oh, man, y'all wasn't over here. South America, there was no Negroes there to the slave trade. North America, there was no Negroes to the slave. How would they know? You think these folks know every square mile of planet Earth? They can tell you what people group is where? That doesn't even make sense, beloved. In any event, maybe that's a different story for a different day. They're going back and forth about the beginning of the Negro, right? Where did he come from and what happened and this and that? So we're going to go on to page 148. It says, this is illustrated with cuts of the Adamic race, the Mongolian, the Malay, the American Indian, the Esquimaux, the Ethiopian, and the Negro, right? We're going to go on to the next paragraph. That the Negro is not a beast but has a soul, but not created after the image of God. That he was created interior to Adam, that means before Adam, together with all the inferior races, numerous in the valley of the Nile, who, check this out, were also the mound builders. But where were these Negroes going around the world? Where were they building the mounds at? The writer says throughout Asia and also in North and South America. And subsequently, Adam and Eve were created, and then creation was complete. Let's stop. Let's talk about that. In the late 1800s, I just want to show you guys range. They're talking about Negroes from the congressional halls of politics in this country all the way up to just writers speaking their opinions about Negroes. Now, the late 1800s, where is the Negro position in the world? Think about it. Where's your position in the world? Right? 1860 to 1866, things are changing around in the territory that we call the United States. You got the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, you got the Confiscation Act. Negroes is now, quote-unquote, free, right? You don't have no full rights. The devil got his foot on our neck. We leaving from one form of working, which is plantation, to sharecropping. And while we at the bottom of the rungs of society, right, there's a devil right in the book. And he's saying in the book that they can't figure out where this Negro come from. One thing they know for sure, no matter how, when they just think about it, this guy was always here. So much so, he couldn't have been here through Bible days. He was here before Adam. He was already here. Now, the messenger always taught us that. The messenger said Negroes ain't come from Adam. When Adam came, when all that story stuff came, we was already here. Maybe that's a different story for a different day. But here's the very, very key part I want you guys to focus on, right? We at the time in this territory that we call the United States was at the bottom. At the very bottom, I mean, the devil had his neck, his foot on our neck, I should say, right? And even then, they know enough about us to say, these Negroes build the mounds everywhere. From Kemet to Asia, to North America, and South America. They know more about our history than we know. Now, how did this guy get a hold on to this information? He wasn't born in it. This is why I'm pointing at the time period. Devils all the way from government, all the way to regular devils that's writing. We are in the fields working all day, every day, and we doing this and we doing that. And while we at our lowest point, they know behind the scenes, these Negroes made these mounds over here. They're going to shoot you at the African game when they get in front of you. Oh, brother, y'all from Africa. Yeah, we brought you all here in the bottom of a ship. And then when they get behind closed doors, they write these books because they're not writing these books for you. See, the thing about that, I always ask my people, they'll say, yo, when was the Negro was allowed to read? Because there was a time in this country Negroes couldn't read now. Like, when? Give me some dates. Give me some times on that. See, I do that to avoid two things. Some of our people say, man, they just writing this stuff to trip you up. That stuff didn't really happen. Okay, if they're writing all this stuff to trip you up, okay. But you couldn't even read at the time. If you could, tell me when you was able to read. And then when you show me that you could read, show me and tell me what you were reading outside of that Bible. Now, I always say this as well. I can use that example today. Like, what the hell do you read today? The Source magazine don't count. Double XL don't count. The Feds magazine that you keep sending to your people that's behind the wall, that don't count. What do you read on your leisure time? Like, what do you read? Outside of the good book, outside of the Quran. Because, we bump on our head 5 times a day now. So, like, outside of those books, what do you read?
Okay, everybody. I have to cut it short. This thing goes all the way up to 52 minutes, but we're running out of time, and I hope you all have gotten something out of this particular broadcast. And I want to ask you a question now. What can you do to save yourself? I think I've presented you with quite a few options. I don't think you can say I didn't, not tonight. But nevertheless, we're going to close down, and we'll be back with some more informative information. And I hope you wrote down the books that I gave you and the authors of the books I gave you. And we'll come back with some more good law for you so you can learn how to use this stuff as a tool to answer question number 2, how do your contract benefit you? And what to do to save yourself. Okay. But nevertheless, I've been your host, Tarhaka Amana Elbay, and until next time, you all have a good
idea.